Welcome back to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. I'm joined by our old friend, Greg Smith. Greg, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me back, man. I'm doing well. Busy as ever. Like it feels like this was supposed to be the slow time, and then it wasn't. So we're in it.
Oh yeah. Kind of this was like you said, obviously supposed to be this like slow month, but I think with everyone's decision timelines accelerated from the
Mhm.
25s trying to make official, like make final commitments here before the season gets started. And then you think about 26s, like schools are trying to get ahead there, and also those guys are
Yep,
trying to cut down their list and start taking their recruitment a little more seriously. So just a lot happening, and I think the good news is kind of the give and take with all this is as busy as the summer now gets, is there are weeks in the season where you can kind of just focus on football and not really focus on
that's
recruiting,
right.
which is nice.
Yeah,
But at the same time, there's always something, that is happening during the season, regardless. Recruiting never
yeah,
never stops. But I'd say for both of us, I think we're both ready for the season. It's
yeah.
finally August. We're finally, football is later this month. So and I know we're both going to be on the road here with fall camp starting up, hitting some of these high schools up. So
Yep.
um, excited to get into it. Kind of not a whole lot to discuss this week. Just some updates on some visitors that rolled in late last week, and then wanted to touch on some 2026s as well, just as the staff is going to spend this month kind of getting ahead there, scheduling some visits out for some 26s. I think overall with where Nebraska stands in 25, I think overall they're just going to start turning the page over to 2026 to get ahead there with they have no commits just yet. And um I mean, this 25 class is all but done. There's just a handful of guys left. One of those left is Michael Terry, the four-star athlete out of Texas. Nebraska had him in town on Monday, Tuesday, and he left Wednesday. And yeah, this is from what we've been able to gather, this is coming down to Texas, Nebraska, and Oregon. And going into this this past weekend of visits where he went to Texas Thursday and Friday, then spent the weekend in Oregon, and then came to Nebraska. Going into that week of visits, it kind of felt like it was going to be Texas and Oregon. I've kind of maintained this feels like Texas, Oregon, Nebraska had some ground to make up. Now heading into the final, I guess, days of this recruitment, a timeline remains unknown, but he wants to make a decision pretty quick. Um, the final days of this decision, it's Texas and Nebraska. Kind of Oregon's bringing up the rear at this point. Again, like I don't think you can really count them out just yet, just because they've got that NIL power. They've got they're relentless. Will Stein's got a good relationship there just from his time at UTSA. I don't think you can count them out just yet, but I think this is coming down to Texas and Nebraska, and I'll also say. I think Texas has the edge, and like we've kind of maintained since the spring, this recruitment's kind of shifting back to what it was in the spring, where if he's going to leave the state, it's going to be Nebraska. But at this point, it just feels hard for him. Feels tough to see him leaving, his home state and spurning the team he grew up rooting for in the Texas Longhorns.
Yeah, that's where it becomes really tricky. Is that man? If you're Nebraska, if they were battling the in-state school they were battling was Texas A&M, you would feel a lot better about the situation. And it's just that he had that kind of rooting interest. Also, Texas has probably a pretty similar plan. Each school, I think, has a pretty similar plan to how they want to utilize him as kind of a Swiss Army knife. Like he can play some out wide, some in the slot, some H back. Like you can just get him the ball in space. Like everyone kind of seems to want to use him in that way. And I do think Nebraska has, or at least Satterfield has some stuff in his history at South Carolina that he could be able to point to with that. Texas still has some players that they can currently point to with that with Steve Sarkisian. And I think that ends up being a little bit of a sticking point too. I will say this though, and this is just it's anecdotal in a way, but when you see Michael Terry on these Nebraska visits, you see the videos, you see the photo, like he looks very comfortable at Nebraska. Like it does look like a place that he's seriously considering that he really would, if he were, like you said, to leave the state, he would come to Nebraska. But I do think it's going to be hard to beat Texas out in this because it's kind of a all things equal. I can stay in the state, get the same in NIL, and Sark's track record on offense is much more proven than what Nebraska has at this point.
For sure. And I think what gave Texas or Nebraska a bit of an edge at one point over Texas was pitching him on not pitching him, but they were just like, hey, we kind of see you on the defensive side of the ball, like kind of fitting
No,
in somewhere at DB or even like a linebacker. But I think the way Texas's wide receiver board is kind of shuffled and the way Terry's kind of just risen up their board, I think they've kind of changed that just in order to not in order to land Terry, but I think genuinely like
they
they
need a
start to
receiver in the class.
right, exactly. They
Yeah,
need receivers in the class, but also I think they are starting to see the vision with what Terry can be as an offensive playmaker. That was always a question for me was, I know Steve Sarkisian knows offense. I know he's real good at offense. But I just kind of wondered specifically like why he didn't see the vision with Terry for so long, like especially on the
yeah,
offensive side of the ball. Like they had kind of slow played him for a bit because again they didn't see him as a receiver, they didn't see him as an offensive weapon, and I never really got that because again I know how Sark likes like Sark loves to use receivers in the backfield. He loves to
right.
line up receivers all over the formation. Like think about how he used Devontae Smith when he was offensive coordinator at Bama. Think about how he used um Keelan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, and like what he's going to use Jonte Cook and Matthew Golden like this year. Like
Right.
he's got this thing with these hybrids, and Terry's like the ultimate hybrid, like in
Right.
my opinion, like the ultimate offensive hybrid. So either way, I think both programs or all three programs have a good plan for him. But yeah, I think it is just kind of wait and see at this point. I'm not really sure what's left for Nebraska to really show or do. These last round of visits were big from the NIL standpoint. I kind of talked about it last week. Kind of wanted to mention that again real quick. But like, yeah, this is a recruitment that at one point, they weren't really sure what the NIL value is, and once they started to realize that, NIL became a much bigger factor here. If you
Yeah.
go and look at the pictures he took when he was at Nebraska, the picture he took with the whole Nebraska staff, the person right next to him is an 1890 representative.
Okay.
So Nebraska's making it known, like, hey, we're competitive here, and we're putting an offer on the table. So an offer's been made, like that's, Nebraska's at least competitive there, but at the
Right.
same time, I think Texas is going to continue. Well, Texas is one of those schools you don't want to really get into a bidding war with. Like they will
No.
outbid you for guys they want.
Especially for a guy that from inside the state, because of perception is an issue with that too, right? Is that you don't want to, if you're Texas, you don't ever want to go back to people saying they're not getting the best players from inside the state to stay at the state school, right? That becomes difficult. So yeah, I think that we'll see. I think that Nebraska has done all that it can in this one. They're not totally out of it, but it's going to be tough to topple Texas here.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the big decisions, obviously waiting for Nebraska this month. The other one is David Sanders Jr., of course, August 17th. Nothing's really changed just from the reporting we've had over the last week or so. Feels like it's Tennessee, Nebraska, Ohio State. I think Georgia still looms as a dark horse. You can never count them out of recruitment, but feels like it's coming down to those top three. And yeah, again, that's another one, just kind of wait and see mode. Nebraska's competitive there on the NIL side. They've shown him and his family that they can be comfortable in Lincoln. I think that was a big question they had to answer. But again, it's just Tennessee's been involved in this recruitment for so long. I think if you want to compare positions in this recruitment, um, Nebraska is in this recruitment what Oregon is in the Michael Terry recruitment, where they're both kind of late to the party, have shown both players interesting things, but ultimately, with the decision coming up, it's just tough to overcome the long-standing relationships. With Terry, it's like that's why Nebraska's overcome Oregon to this point. And on Sanders' side, that's why I don't think Nebraska is going to be able to overcome Tennessee or Ohio State. But again, they're competitive. They've put their best foot forward. Like at this point, I don't think anything would really surprise me there, though.
Yeah, that's where I kind of am on this one is that Georgia would surprise me in this one, to be honest. And I think that they're doing fine with their offensive line recruitment. I think they'll get another one here soon when this goes out on what happens there. But I think that Georgia is probably out. I think that it's a very interesting battle here because each school between Ohio State, Tennessee, and Nebraska, like very much want and need David Sanders, right? And it's not just because if he wasn't a 5 star, if he was a high quality 4 star, it would still be the same situation. Ohio State, the one kind of thing that their fan base especially really doesn't like about what's happening at Ohio State right now is their offensive line recruiting. Justin Fry, their offensive line coach, seems to be like the squeaky wheel in their recruiting machine. And it's just such a weird situation. You know, you look up and they take who they want at, say, quarterback and wide receiver and defensive back, and then he struggles with offensive linemen. You have the top offensive lineman who had seemed to be an Ohio State lean for so long. If they don't get him, it's going to be pandemonium out there in Columbus, which, you know, Nebraska fans are like, hey, that's fine. Then at Tennessee, they are a team that has recruited him very hard from the beginning. We know about, it's funny. We talk about Oregon and their kind of NIL power. Tennessee is not that far off from that. They are a team that Tennessee is kind of like Auburn, in my opinion, where they will spend. I don't think that they are as good at spending and figuring out like exactly who they're supposed to be spending on. But they do spend the money, right, at Tennessee. And Tennessee is a program that it feels like it's on the rise, even though if the results to me don't necessarily match up with that. And then you have Nebraska, who is obviously trying to climb up. You've got the Dylan Raiola factor. You know that 1890 has been heavily involved in this. To me, though, this will come down to, does David Sanders, feel comfortable in Lincoln, like you were mentioning? I do think that that was a big part of this. But the big X factor here is Donovan Raiola. What's that relationship like? Because the guys that really like Donnie are all in on him, and the guys that don't are just kind of like, eh. So where is that relationship? And I think that will tell you how much Nebraska is or isn't a real contender in this race.
For sure. And that's a good point on Raiola. You know, he gets his guys on the O line. Like, guys
Yeah,
that,
and they love him when
yep,
they come. They love him.
yep. And so
Yeah,
that's why he's very particular with who he brings in, and that's why he's also very like, you know, you'll see them maybe spurn some higher ranked guys for a lower ranked project sometimes, or it's like, why are they going all in on this center and not this one? But like,
right.
you kind of realize he's got a type, and he coaches it a specific way. He's got a certain personality that he finds guys that gels with, and ultimately that works out in the end, because you want people that you feel you don't want to recruit just off ranking. You don't want to recruit just off
Right.
that. You want to recruit off, especially at the line. You want to recruit off personality. You want to recruit off guys that can mesh well together, not with just with the position coach, but with other guys in the room. And so when you get, 15, 20 like-minded individuals, that's how you get a line like what Nebraska seems to have right now, and what they seem to, want to keep building is this room that is very tight-knit, that is very interchangeable, and just a room that guys, love to be in. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I do think, as we think about the football season being here on that point about the offensive line, I do think it's going in the right direction. And I think he's going to get it there with the offensive line. It just may end up looking a little bit different than what it looks like at some other places, where this could be a place where it is a lot more developmental pieces, but because he's got a good eye for what he's looking for, and by all accounts, Braille is a very good coach technically. You just have to, but it takes longer. It takes longer to build that up than to be inserting and plugging and playing guys like David Sanders or Jordan Seaton from the class before that, and people like that. It just takes a little longer to cook, but once you get it there, then it ends up in a much better situation in the long run, I think, especially for a place like Nebraska. It's more sustainable to build it the way that he's trying to build the offensive line.
Yep. And yeah, and that's like that's a big question kind of coming into the year, is who's going to finally kind of start in some of these spots that are left for Nebraska. But that is a question for another time. I think we're
Right.
we're more recruiting focused here, obviously. But yeah, kind of turning the page on to some of these 25s that are left. There's kind of two Midwest targets left for Nebraska at this point. Christian Jones, in-state 4-star linebacker. Everyone's well aware at this point. And then Will Hawthorne, the 3-star linebacker out of Gilbert, Iowa. I think Hawthorne's decision, Jones, we kind of know, we can touch on that in a second, but Hawthorne, I think the decision it taking this long, I think has been a bit of a surprise for me. He kind of left June being like, I want to make a decision pretty early in July. It's coming down to Nebraska and Iowa State. But he felt really torn at the end of June. Like when I talked to him, it felt like a true 50-50. You know, guys put out these like top two, top three. You never really, you know, most of the time they're leaning towards one or the other.
Right.
This was truly felt like 50-50 right down the middle. And it stayed that way, you know, like during the dead period. He kind of drove into Lincoln and saw the city a little bit. Obviously didn't get to spend any time with the coaches or anything, but just saw the city and got to hang out and just kind of get a feel for what Lincoln has for him. And then obviously he lives in Gilbert, just a few minutes away from Ames. So he's pretty familiar with what Iowa State has to offer. For him, it really just, again, I think the same thing here is it just comes down to what he wants, you know, kind of Greg, in your opinion, kind of what have you seen from him, the player? Kind of he's had a big rise this offseason. And then where do you see this recruitment landing, and where do you think it currently stands, I guess?
Yeah, I think as a player, I like him because he's 6'1", 215, 220 or so that can go sideline to sideline, and has some position versatility. I like him playing inside. I like him kind of in that stack position in Nebraska's defense at 3-3-5. Like he's a versatile guy, which is what I think that Nebraska continues to covet everywhere, but especially on that defense, given what they like to do on defense. I think that with his recruitment, it's interesting because anytime to me a kid that is right by a school that he's considering, yet he continues to delay the decision, I think that is bodes well for the other school, this case Nebraska, right? Because to me, Nebraska has obviously given him a ton to think about. And it's also a stability situation too. I get it that Matt Campbell has been at Iowa State for a while now. They've had some struggles and hit some speed bumps here, right? Though, like some bumps in the roads have definitely been hit up in Ames. And so, if Nebraska can sell him on, we've got the better trajectory within this program, especially on our defense with the way that it's going. I think that they have a really good case to close this thing. It's just always difficult when someone lives so close to the other school that he's considering, because it always becomes it's much harder in the end. I think that people realize to spurn that local school and go somewhere else. Like it's very difficult to do. You think about like the kid's life as he goes through the next year of having said, yeah, Iowa State's right up the road, and probably 90% of my friends are Iowa State fans, but I'm going to go to Nebraska. That becomes very difficult.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't really get, you know, how hard those final hours of recruitment are. Like having to call those coaches and be like, "Hey, I'm not
That's it.
coming." Like I'm going to have to I'm like, and again, like you're saying, when it's a hometown type situation, like it's got to be real tough for Hawthorne, not even to just to make that call, but even consider when he's like, "Okay, if I were to commit to Nebraska, it means I have to call Matt Campbell and let him know
All right.
I'm not coming." And that's just something that for a lot of guys, it just takes forever. There's recruitments that have shifted just off of in the past. You know, you and I have covered recruitments in the past where like it's kind of shifted in these final hours just because it's impossible for these guys to make these phone calls and tell a certain coach no, or tell a certain guy like I'm not coming. And those final moments where it's just like, oh man, if I can't tell him no now, like maybe I should just go there. Like that's
Right.
what goes on for some of these guys. And that's the fun part about this fun-ish, not for us, but
It
you know,
makes it
just in general,
chaotic.
as a casual fan, it's
Chaotic.
the
Yeah.
fun part of recruitments is these final hours where things do get very crazy. And so we've been kind of in this quote unquote final hours phase for a month now, you know,
Yeah.
kind of going back and forth between, and a big part of Nebraska's final pitch to him was, you fit the Big Ten, you're a Big Ten linebacker, but also the Big Ten is the future of college football. Like Iowa State is in the Big 12. They run the risk of being left behind. The Big
Right.
Ten is going to be here. The Big Ten's not going anywhere. And I think that was a big part of their pitch, and it resonated. And I think that's something he's really considering is like, again, like that long-term stability, not just from a coaching standpoint, but from a conference standpoint. That's something a lot of these guys have had to consider. Like that was a key reason why, you know, Nebraska was able to quickly flip Brian Tapu from Oregon State. I think just like he kind of sat down and realized, oh wait, Oregon State's kind of in no man's land right now. Like
Right.
they're between conferences. They're you know, and Nebraska was able to just quickly be like, hey, you know, I think you made a mistake here. Just flip to Nebraska like you were initially planning on doing. And yeah, you know, before we get you out of here, just wanted to touch on some 26s, like we mentioned, you know, kind of pages starting to turn, things are starting to move.
Yep.
One real quick off the top. Raymore Peculiar out of Missouri,
Yeah,
four-star running back, Zephan Walker, one of the top running backs in the country. We have him listed as the number 3 running back per
yeah,
Rivals and a top 100 player. He visited Nebraska on Wednesday. For just real quick, it was his third or fourth visit up to Nebraska. He's been on campus a couple of times. Obviously, some familiar ties. Jaden Doss hails from Ray Peck.
yep.
They were teammates at one point, and so I think that opportunity to potentially team up against intriguing. What makes him such an intriguing player, and kind of like lay out this recruitment for us if you can.
Yeah, he's a really intriguing player to me. I actually saw him just a couple of weeks ago again at a 7-on-7 tournament. I saw him play when I went to see Jaden Doss play. I really like him because he's a guy that he's like 5'11", 6 foot, 200-ish pounds, and really kind of muscled up. So he can run between the tackles. He's got very good speed, like straight line speed is very good. Got a little bit of wiggle to him. But the thing that makes him unique to me is that I think he does a good job of catching the ball out of the backfield. So you can actually, use him in the passing game as well. Did very well with that in the tournament. I saw him at a 7-on-7, ran some real nice wheel routes that teams just could not stop for whatever reason. Like felt like everyone knew it was coming. They still couldn't stop it. But his recruitment is a little interesting because it is not quiet in that schools aren't recruiting him. He has not been out to a lot of places. Like a lot of teams have come to his school. He was just at Texas A&M right after that 7-on-7 tournament, like that weekend that the dead period opened. He was at Texas A&M. Then he's at Nebraska. I think Nebraska is going to be in this one to the end, and somewhat because of the familiarity between Ray Peck and this Nebraska staff, and also his relationship with Jaden Doss. It's proximity. It's close to home. Just a few hour drive. Like I think Nebraska will be in this one. He's a really talented player. Like it's funny because I went there like, okay, is he still as good as I thought he was? I saw him as a freshman, and now he's going into it his junior year. But no, he's very good. He's a really good player.
Yeah, and kind of touching on some other guys in the Midwest. I think I guess putting you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
Would you say true or false? These 3 players would be the most important Midwest targets for Nebraska this cycle. I'd say Jackson Cantwell, Titan Davis, and then Max Sutter. But that last name I think is interchangeable with a couple of tight ends given
given what's
right.
Listen, I'm gonna say this now. If they miss on Max Sutter, like there are so many tight ends in the Midwest. It's funny. I think behind the curtain, we were just doing our rankings meetings for 26, and I'm like fighting tooth and nail to get as many of those Midwest tight ends up in the rankings. I think I got all of them up the way that I wanted to. There's a lot of them. There's kids, in Iowa and Evan Jacobson. There's the kids in Michigan. There's Max Sutter and J.C. Anderson in Illinois. So we'll see what happens with Illinois. But I would say true to your question, primarily on the strength of Cantwell and Davis, though we could flip Sutter for Keenan Harris.
Yep.
That could be a one to look out for. I think that Cantwell is one, obviously, will be even more important than, say, David Sanders is right now because of his location, because he's from the region, because he's been to Nebraska already a couple of times. They're going to be a mainstay in this recruitment. Problem with Cantwell for now is that it's wide open, right? But the teams that it's wide open with are like the who's who of college football. Then it's Missouri, the in-state team that's got all the NIL money, and then Nebraska, who he does have good relationships with. Like that one's just going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. I talked to him actually after he did that SEC swing here a few days ago, and he basically told me that it's getting even more difficult to narrow it down because all of these schools are great and like he likes all the coaching staff. So we'll see. But he is going to probably come to Nebraska for a game day visit. Titan Davis is, we talk about kind of them wanting to get into Missouri and be able to land some of those players. A kid out of St. Louis, another really good defensive lineman. Remember, I talked about earlier, they've got to start shifting, in my opinion, to getting in with some of these big-time defensive linemen, and he's definitely one that they're going to want to continue on. I'd like to see them get involved with a guy like Braden Jones, a strong side defensive end out of Illinois, who's a 4-star, but we'll see. And then Keenan Harris, I'll mention briefly. He was just on campus. I know you spoke with him. I talked to him a little bit. He really likes Nebraska. Like he's very much where Nebraska. I asked him like, "Hey, is Nebraska like a factor for you at this point?" This kind of flat out as him. He was like, "They've always been a factor." So Keenan Harris, a 4-star outside linebacker out of St. Louis, is definitely a player to watch. And Nebraska's done a great job of recruiting him early on.
Yep, and he fits so well in what
So
Nebraska
perfectly,
wants.
perfectly.
Perfectly,
Yeah.
like just exactly what Nebraska wants at linebacker in the defense in general. He's got some versatility too. Like,
Hmm.
he can line up in a couple different spots, but he fits so well. And yeah, man, I talked to him too, and he kind of mentioned like the best relationships in the school he talks to the most right now is Nebraska. Like that's the school
Yeah.
that's on him the most right now. Obviously, this is the who's once again.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, Oregon, Ohio State, USC. Like it is a loaded
The
recruitment.
thing about it though with him is I felt last year his recruitment was a little slow, but Nebraska was already on him, and I do
Mhm.
wonder if that's going to help them a lot. Is that he has continued to blow up, and it is they're coming from all over the country. But I do think that early relationship is something to keep an eye on with Keenan Harris in Nebraska here because they were early on him before he blew up. Kind of after this summer is where he really took a big step after. I think he won MVP at linebacker at Rivals Camp Indianapolis, and was great there after moving from safety to linebacker. So yeah, I think that that's something to definitely keep an eye on.
For sure. And it's funny you mentioned that. One of the last things I kind of asked him on the phone was, okay, I know you've got some time and you're taking your time with this, but like what are the factors that are going to lead to, a school landing your commitment? And the first thing he mentioned was, for a school like Nebraska, obviously the fact that they've been in this as long as they have means a
Mm-hmm.
ton. Like Nebraska and Missouri
Yeah.
have been in this for a long, long time. And I
Yep.
think that matters. Like that was the first thing he mentioned. And he was like, it wasn't even related to Nebraska necessarily. It's just like the schools that have wanted me the longest. Like for some guys, that is everything in a recruitment. It matters to
Right.
most every recruit, like being early. But for a guy like Harris and for certain kids, it means more than anything is who was there first, who was
Yeah.
there, who believed in me when no one else did, who was willing to take that chance on me when no one else did. Nebraska was that for Harris. And, ultimately it could lead to a commitment. We've got plenty, a year or so at least until the
Yeah.
decision, I'm assuming at this point. That's his timeline at the moment. But yeah, and real quick, closing off, Max Sutter, obviously a guy that I think Nebraska would love to have, but like you said, not a huge miss just because Evan Jacobson's in Iowa. That's another big tight end.
Yeah. He's a big time
JC
kid.
Anderson's in Illinois. That's another big tight end in the area. But a
Yeah.
tight end
Ian
they've kind
Primer
of
in
made
Kansas, like there's a
right.
bunch of them.
Premer's a guy they've made a priority. They've had him on
Yeah.
campus a couple of times. He's handling his recruitment in an interesting way, and I think especially after Lincoln Kerr this 2025 cycle, don't think you can count out Kansas State or Kansas with him. I think the
Yeah. I
opportunity
agree.
to stay in the state. I think you can't count out Missouri there. But Nebraska's done a really good job with him so far. But yeah, that'll do it for us. Another episode with Greg. Appreciate you, Greg. I'm sure we're going to get you on a couple times this season. I'm excited for
Yeah.
the fall. You're
Absolutely.
excited for the fall. And yeah, man, like I said, appreciate your time and we will talk soon.